Welcome and good morning with another episode of Unpublic with Citizen Stewart and Sharif El-Mekki on this Friday, this Freedom Friday. It is Freedom Friday and you are still not free, but hopefully after this hour of spending time with us, you will be freer than you were when you started. Today, we are talking about an ominous issue. We are talking about standards, assessments, and accountability in American public schools. Why do we need standards, accountability, assessments for American public schools? Well, it should be obvious that for a number of years, our American public schools have failed entire swaths of students. There have been students who have been so-called left behind, but not really left behind. They were put behind by the system that they were in. It was by design. And, you know, in the 1980s, there became a push to say we should do more measurements. We should measure where students are, and then we should measure growth and progress to see if we're putting out more mathematicians, more scientists, more people that are proficient in the things that we know that they need to be proficient in to be good citizens, to be, you know, people who can calculate mortgage interest, for instance, or who can understand loans or understand important issues that are in the public. So part of the way that we know that was an outcome of schooling was through testing. But over the years, educators have done a successful job of maligning testing, especially standardized testing. They say that it is inherently biased. They say that, you know, it's racist. They say that it only tells teachers and educators what they already know, which is that many students are failing and they knew that already, so they don't need a test to tell you that. They also tell you that standardized testing is a way to defund public schools. They tell you that testing is really just a proxy for how educated your parents are and what race and economic status your parents are, which to me is among the more insulting pushbacks to standardized testing. So this is just my frame, giving us an understanding at the beginning of what we're going to talk about. I'll just lay my cards on the table and tell you, I think all of that is nonsense. I think it's marketing from American teachers unions over years. I don't think it really became a problem for as long as testing was used to sort students into classrooms. And for as long as teachers with the most seniority were able to get the classrooms with the so-called best performing kids, testing was never a problem. Testing didn't become a problem for American educators until it started exposing how many of them needed to be held accountable. And once there was a sense that teachers needed to be accountable for the outcomes, all of a sudden, testing became the worst sin ever. And now you have an outsized campaign from teachers and their unions and their establishment to disregard the information that we get from tests and to get the public to truly believe that it's invalid, it's biased. It doesn't tell you everything that you need to know. It's being used for the wrong purposes without ever really being explicit about their critiques of testing. That's what we're going to talk about today. Sharif El-Mekki, brother, jump in. How are you doing?
Good, doing well, man. Glad to be, jumping into this topic. When you retweeted, quote tweeted Kendi's comment, I just really thought about like the dangers of a little bit of information. Nothing's more dangerous than a little bit of information. Someone with Kendi's platform and profile to kind of just drop something into your pot, right? Like, and people who are unaware just taking that and using that, right? Like, I guarantee you, either today or in the future, somebody's going to black quote us, and that's what I call, what Malcolm used to say, that as soon as you start talking truth about anything, they're going to trot a black person in front of you to say, no, that ain't right. That ain't true. Right. But it's particularly dangerous in something like Twitter, where people across the country who aren't committed to Black liberation, who aren't committed to ensuring that other people's children are receiving just the same amount of information as they are. For people who don't believe, as Dr. Carr talks about, the Freedom School tradition of teaching is about training your replacements in society, right? There are a whole lot of people who are leading classrooms who do not look at the students in front of them as their replacements. They're like, no, this is a job. You ain't my replacement. You aren't a contributor to society the way that I am and my family is, or my children. You're not my replacement, right? And so if you have that framework and you have no sense of how you're going to assess the quality, the growth, the impact, where do you go from there? Like, I'm just trying to picture a doctor, everybody talk about elevating the teaching profession, making it get the respect that it deserves, all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to picture doctors or medical, because that's often teachers like, oh, we want to be like the medical field, or, the lawyers guild, or whatever it is, where they would say, yeah, we're not gonna assess our medical students to see how well they can actually perform surgery. We'll just, we'll just ignore that. Just trust us. And I have a big problem with just trusting. When you look at all the data, all the research that says the racial biases that Black students experience as young as 3 and 4 years old from the educator, the racial biases that are threaded throughout all this research that says racial bias, discriminatory, anti-Blackness, all this stuff, and then say, but hey, we don't just trust that we're teaching your kids the best that we can. That's scary.
Yeah, it's more than scary. I mean, if you think about the idea that we measure and test a lot of things so that we can kind of keep, as a people, we kind of keep tabs on our government, right? So like, for instance, police officers don't like body cameras. And a lot of times when something goes down and the public asks for the tape, they'll find out that the body camera got turned off at a certain point, right?
Yeah. Or they don't release it for a couple of years, right?
Or they don't release it for
forgot about it.
Yeah. And the police officers will say, well, you don't really know the context of our work. You don't know what happened before and after. And you're not a police officer, so you don't understand, and blah, 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 blah. Right. I don't know that anybody loves being held accountable in that way to the public, being that transparent. But the equivalent to a body cam for me, honestly, for teachers, honestly, is a test, because we don't have much else. A lot of teachers like to shut their door and say, leave me alone. Just I'm going to go in here and do my stuff. But your kid is in there.
They say to every parents, principals, peers, colleagues, anybody, leave me alone.
Stay out. Yeah, just stay out. Leave me alone. I mean, and this is a couple of things that I think are important. Number one, it's important to say, what are teachers' relationships to test themselves? And the first relationship that we know that they have to standardized tests is that too many of them don't pass the test themselves, right? So we have too many teachers that don't pass what it takes to pass in each state to become licensed to become a teacher, and it takes them multiple tries. That to me is a signal. That's a sign about what type of attitude you're going to have about tests in the future. You also have a lot of teachers that are not, their education is not in what they're actually teaching, right? So with each of these things that I say, I can see how the psychology of the teacher shifts from being test positive to being test negative. Like I'm negative about tests. I failed them. It took me 5 tries to pass one to become a teacher, right? In some cases, they tested teachers with the same test that their students are supposed to take, and many of them failed those tests, right? In New Orleans, after Katrina, when all the teachers came back to the city, they tested all the teachers because they wanted the best of the best in the new system. And a third of the teachers completely failed the basic skills test, like the basics of the basics, like they were no better off than the students, right? So those teachers had been teaching for years prior to Katrina. These are veteran people. They had been in the system. Do you think that it's fair to make a connection between what I just said? Like the attitudes about, of course, professional attitudes, if you're going to become a doctor, are really high, because everybody knows if you became a doctor, you went through years and years and years to get there. And, there was a fairly robust process for weeding out people who weren't ready. But in teaching, we allow teachers to fail the test multiple times and then still become a teacher.
Yeah. I think, with With teacher preparation, I think one, it's just problematic on so many different angles. Like we often talk about who's in front of our children in pre-K to 12, but we also have to think about who's in front of the teachers as they're being prepared and trained and developed to become, the teacher of record for our most vulnerable population, our children. And so when you look at that, it's problematic on multiple levels. And it's not just, and so it's more complex than like, students not passing it the first time, because I always believe in like trying to find the root cause. Not only is there a problem with, preparation for post-secondary education for so many students because pre-K-12 systems are so bad, particularly in areas that Black and brown and poor children attend. But then on top of that, you have unprepared professors trying to teach, professors who have no connection to the Black and brown communities, which make up the majority of the pre-K 12th grade population. So if they're disconnected to those communities, if they don't look at this as an absolute, purest form of activism and path to liberation is great education, how in the world can they prepare teachers? And you will have professors say like, well, I don't care about the exam to become a teacher. I just care about my class. Right. And if they have tenure, then they can do that. Even if they don't have tenure, if the university's stance, if the teachers' college's stance is not pro-student, outcomes, then it won't matter, because they will teach whatever they feel like teaching, whatever makes them feel good. And that trickles down. We have teachers who are in pre-K-12. They're like, yeah, I don't care about that standard. This makes me feel good. It makes my toes curl. It gives me a mushy feeling inside. It makes the kids are smiling and they are doing this busy work of something that's important. They were so-called engaged, right? But not being engaged and taking ownership of learning are two different things. But I've heard professors directly say, now, like, hey, does the course that you teach in college, this math course that the college student needs to become a teacher, is it aligned to the test that they'll have to take to become a teacher? And they'll say no, but this is more important. If you're a professor, part of your goal isn't to ensure that your student is prepared for the teacher exam. What are you doing? And why are you so arrogant to say, like, I don't care about your goals, right? And this goes back to this connectivity. The teacher's goal is to become, this aspiring teacher wants to become a teacher. You're saying, I don't care about that path. You should, but I know best as far as what you should learn. And so that misalignment happens a lot.
I don't know how you can hold it accountable then. If at the very beginning of the teaching pipeline, which, I guess it begins with recruiting. So there's nothing, it feels like, in place at the recruiting phase where you're recruiting for quality. And then you put them in the hands of what you just said, professors who have their own kind of way of doing things. They don't want to be held accountable for anything or whatnot.
Ebony Tiver, we know better than all y'all mofos.
We know better. Well, and not only do you know better all over the map, because if every individual college and every individual professor is allowed to just do whatever,
which they are,
it becomes hard for for public accountability of the overall system. We think about K-12 schools in terms of just K-12 schools, but we don't think that there's this long continuum of people that are involved in it, and we're paying all of them. And you just mentioned, you took me further upstream. So now we have unaccountable professors and unaccountable colleges with unaccountable standards. But they want accountable parents, right?
Exactly. But which is why you get so many of them, the unaccountable camp supports unaccountability further downstream, right? Like, and so it just becomes this entire cycle. Like, yeah, we're going to support you in no accountability, because we also don't want them coming at us for accountability. At the end of the day, when have you centered Black students? And then so when we all talk about on this program, 8 Black Hands and elsewhere, that these institutions, these systems were not built with Black student liberation in mind, with Black students having as many choices and opportunities that they want, right? Like that these institutions are built for their aspiration. This is why we say it is not built for them, because they are never centered in how we make decisions, particularly around How are we accountable for their success? Because we're not training our replacements in the system. We're just, like, hey, as long as you can get a job, right? Like you hear so much, oh, just get this and get a job, which means get it as long as you are good enough to work for us.
Wow. The thing that you're painting, the picture that you're painting right now for me, that's making this much more clear, because I don't ever really think of it in the big scheme of things. It's not just about testing or accountability or the standards. At the end of the day, those are things we can come to that. Let's come to that. But the education is a large group of people that are working together, supposedly to do the best for our kids, in a long continuum of activities that they're doing. And we as the public don't get to see all of that unless you're in it, unless you're involved in it. So we are taxpayers, and we are saying to the education establishment, let's have some understandings with each other, right? That's all accountability and assessments and standards are to me, is like an agreement. Like, I have a child, you are the state, you're putting together a lot of stuff over there for my kid. Let's discuss what type of arrangement. Now, I need to get my kid to bed on time. I need to help them get up in the morning, get dressed, get ready for school, and bring them to your school, bring them to your doorstep, ready to learn. Okay, because that's what everybody's asking of me as a good parent. They're saying, you need to do your part, Chris. Okay, well, okay. Now, what do you need to do on your end? And how are we going to know? What are the measurements? How are we going to have some sort of, how are we going to know that relationship between home and school? Tell me what we're going to know. Well, one easy way for me is for you to tell me ahead of time what the standards are. Like, well, Chris, your child is in first grade, and in first grade in your state, this is what your child's supposed to be hitting. So just so you know at home, you should be paying attention to that and helping them hit that point. And just so you know, me in the classroom, I should be trying to help them hit that point. Okay, cool. Well, how are we going to know if they hit that point?
Well, just trust us.
Yeah, just trust us.
We said they did. Look at their letter grade on the report card.
Well, I mean, I think we discovered during the war on poverty.
People are saying, like, don't even have grades, right? Like, so
yeah, Alfie Kohn would be like, no grades, no grades, tests, no nothing,
no standards, no assessment, just send us your kid.
Let's just be real. Alfie Kohn and that camp of educators, those are white people who did well in school and have privileged lives because they went through a very white system that was molded in their image, and they came out the other end thinking this thing is great. American public schooling is like the best invention ever. Of course you believe that, just like the little young kids that went through the plantation system thought plantation systems were amazing because they were being taken care of the whole time, right? Yeah. So everybody else was like, yeah, no, the plant, bruh, I know you had a good time, but now that plantation was not very good for everybody, right? So this is helping me understand we need to talk about this big agreement, like between home and school, home and state. Like, what are the measurements going to be? But we can't do it if educators are saying, no measures really are going to ever work. Like, what we do is an art form, so it can't really be, it's not a science, it's an art. We can't really ever have any honest measurements. I don't know how we get around that, because that's a non-negotiable for me. I don't trust the system enough to say that we shouldn't have any measurements. And no one should.
Yeah, I don't see how you do with even just an inkling of a historic perspective, or even if you have no historic perspective, just looking at today, like, how do you just put full trust in what's going on? Like, listen, if you just look at the research, and again, the racial biases against Black children is so pervasive, so profound, and so impactful, right? Whether it is discipline, how often they get Black children receive disciplinary referrals, suspended, expelled, whatever. How few times, even if they have the same exact scores and profiles of white children, they're still less likely to be referred to honors classes, mentally gifted courses, AP courses. Like, it is still, even in diverse schools, you can look at the top tier, most rigorous courses, and you can predict it right from the beginning who's going to be in there, who's not. Right? You see that in school entry and acceptance. when it is an so-called elite school, a magnet school, when you talk about urban areas, it never looks like the population. Very few times does it look like the actual population of the schools, right? But then you can connect that to teacher colleges. So many teacher colleges where they say like, yes, we're coming to do this, and they got all the rhetoric about whatever universities talk about. Why don't their teacher colleges look like as diverse as their overall college? And many of these colleges aren't diverse anyway, but like the teacher colleges are even less diverse than the actual university, right? Where they should be actually leaving it in a way, because they're always talking about how they're aligned with civil rights and human rights and all this kind of stuff, right? You just see the consistent, I want to say inconsistency, but it's not. It's inconsistent with the language and the rhetoric to the actions, but it's remarkably consistent as it has always been. And you can trace that thread, whether it's in the university level, all the way down to pre-K. It is consistently, built against, barriers provided, with no questions. And so the fact that you acknowledge all the barriers, all the racism, the inherent biases throughout the system, but to say, and we're just going to trust that it happened. And I guess my biggest frustration, no one's saying that the standardized test everything. No one's saying that. Everything is a flawed system, like everything. But what you try to do is at least elevate the conversation to like, here's how it can be improved. Not just, oh, we're not going to do anything. Like, so we're not going to be able to compare how Pennsylvania is doing compared to Massachusetts or California. Like, we're not going to do that at all. We're not going to be able to see like, where do Black children perform better, or where the teachers of Black, we talk about this achievement gap between Black and white students. The achievement gap we should be talking about is the gap between adults' preparation to teach Black and brown kids. The achievement gap is an adult gap, and it starts in college, and it trickles all the way down through pre-K-12.
Yeah, so this is you hit right on the button where it's my time to trot out the thing I always trot out at this point from the African American Leadership Forum. When we broke down the so-called achievement gap, it actually broke down into 5 gaps. It was the preparation gap, the time gap, the belief gap, the teaching gap, and the leadership gap. So students of color and students who are in poverty often have adults in their lives that participate in all these gaps: a leadership gap, a teaching gap, a belief gap, which to me is the one I've harped on the most, is the belief gap. Because if you don't, there are studies, so let me not say this in a way like it's going to sound like an opinion. There are studies that basically have said in history, there have been studies that have been done that say if you tell teachers ahead of time that a classroom full of kids are gifted, versus telling them that the classroom is full of remedial students, the same students will get a different type of teaching based on what you tell the teacher they're about who they're about to teach, right? So if you tell teachers this is the gifted class, even though none of the kids have tested for gifted and they're not gifted, the way that they approach that classroom is totally different if you tell them that, yeah, these are, there's some real mediocre kids in here, or, whatever, right?
Mindset is everything.
Mindset is huge. And so if your mindset is these tests are racist, our kids can't possibly pass them because they're poor, they're inarticulate, their culture is not like my own, so I assume that they're not, intelligent in there somewhere. I mean, I could give you a very simple thing that I've seen here in Minnesota. And I don't know if this is the same where you're at, but there's a silent killer here that you can talk about that's observable, but it's not in our data necessarily, which is if you have a Southern accent or a Chicago accent even, and you come into Minneapolis public schools or a school in Minnesota, there's an instant assumption that you are less intelligent than you are if you speak with a Minnesota register, like if you speak like a Minnesotan. So a Southern accent instantly drops your IQ.
Southern
points.
drawl, like, oh, yeah. you
yeah. And you could be a brilliant scholar from the South, but that accent itself. And I've often thought about how that translates into other areas of the way that teachers are how their mindset is developed. Natalie Wexler says this in one of her articles. I found this interesting because to me, this is the impact of why assessments in my mind matter. She says students often don't learn the basics in high school or even college. Only 22% of American 12th graders score proficient or above on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, test in science. On NAEP history, geography, and civics test, proficiency rates are similar or worse than 22%. Now, this is across the board. Some college students are unable to answer questions like who won the Civil War. What
they
country?
Might just say it's still in debate.
Well, it's racist. It's racist to say that it's racist to say there's a right answer to that question, right? Why you want us to know something like that? That's racist. What country did we win our independence from? Can't answer a question like that, right? Mm-hmm. So you could go and say, yeah, that has nothing to do with teaching or standards of what people should know. That just has to do with how racist that test was that they took. And I thought this is where the needle turns for me, because I'm willing to believe anything is racist. To be very honest with you, you can convince me anything is racist, right? I'll just be like, yep, that's racist.
Look, I used to tease my kids that, with the crosswalk, I don't know if it's national, but the white man flash where you can walk. My kids are like, you see that? They try to tell us. My kids are like, yo, Dad, chill.
Listen, I'm with you. You can tell me anything is racist, and I'm like likely to be like, well, the starting point is yes, the default is yes, you're right. But on something like, is the test racist because it wants you to know who won the Civil War? Right. This is where the anti-testing thing starts falling down for me. Yesterday, when I had a long kind of Twitter engagement with several people about this, I actually went and looked at our state test again, just to remind myself, because I've done this before. The state produces samples of the state test for parents to go and look and try and whatever and take it yourself. And I had a hard time finding anything where I would look at it and I would go, yeah, this is racist. Like, this isn't something my kids should be able to do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like if that's my question, is this something my kids should be able to answer? I didn't find anything where I was like, nah, this is culturally inappropriate. So help me understand where that comes from. Is 5 bigger than 6? Oh, that's a racist question.
Well, I think, so what I think is multiple ways to take a look at it. I'm chuckling, but the basic idea, but I think it starts with like agreement of like what standards are, what high expectations are. What are biases that are embedded in expectations that weight them down? Start off buoyed on the top of the ocean, but once you put the low expectations and racial biases, it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. So I think an important part. So in Pennsylvania, I was fortunate to be one of the members of the team to look at the assessments that the state would give to 3rd through 8th graders and once in high school, reading, math, science. And so we would look at biases and try to detect bias. A team of us would pour through every single passage, every single question, and try to do it. There were biases in the assessment. We got better and better over the years because things would be flagged with the statisticians and the metro. You have all these different folks who are kind of creating exams, and we would flag biases. So we're actually training them because we would give them feedback about why this was either just a really bad question, why it was, inconsistent with others, why it doesn't align to the actual standard. So there's multiple vetting systems that this would go through. But some of the biases I can share with you is one, are there racial biases in there? When we first started out, there were some things that you were like, when I say racial bias, it wouldn't necessarily be like, oh yeah, that Negro this, that Negro that.
No, help me understand. What would be? Give me an example of something.
So what you would see in these exams are consistent portrayals of, if you have a passage in reading, for example, the doctor, the lawyer, was always portrayed as a white person.
Mm-hmm.
If it was a job of if in the passage it talks about a person in some kind of service industry, it was always a black person. Or if you had things like fireman all the time, policeman all the time, and the hotel maid and another way. So these are all the things that come from the biases of whoever writes, and it just portrayed because that's their natural order. They believe when whiteness is the default, then you're going to write exams as white default. You're going to say, oh yeah, this sender, the white girl is always inquisitive in this, the black person is always challenged in this kind of thing, right? And so you would see those type of things, and it wasn't just biases towards race. You would see ageism, where the old person was always.
Well, wait a second now. Let me just challenge this on one point, though.
Sure.
So what you're pointing out is a representational bias, meaning who is represented. But in terms of a flaw of the question itself, shouldn't I still be able to answer it even if it is a fireman rather than a fire person?
Yeah, but I want you to imagine you're taking an assessment over and over and over and over again. Like, and you need students to be motivated, right? Like, and what impact is it really a true measure of what they know? Or am I sick or tired of being this? But then there are other factors as well. So when you look at the other biases that are included are terms, right? That's a bias. If I'm only talking about bobsleds and hockey and and skiing, and
then you're in Minnesota.
But you're anywhere. You could be wherever. You could be in Philadelphia, and you're like, what? But you're never talking about trolleys or playing jacks or jump rope, right? That means it is biased towards one experience, which means that, when you read the knowledge gap and they talk about like, hey, even the folks who English, they did these assessments where, folks in England, they used all these baseball terms, and their highest performing students still failed the test. So that means the test itself, how the passage, the questions, the wording did not pull was this person a good reader. And at the end of the day, what you want are the best type of assessments where you can see, do they understand point of view? Do they understand syntax and semantics? Do they understand these type of things? Can they comprehend what was written? Can they summarize it? But if you're talking about, fielder's choice and stolen bases to someone who has no baseball context, even the context clues is not going to help them answer the questions that were geared toward. So that is that type of scenario that's unweighted unfavorably against, black and brown children, particularly, like make it even, make the kid in Minnesota talk about the trolley tracks.
That's what I was about to ask you is, like, when you're testing for something like reading and you have a passage, are you saying that, like, if it's more familiar, there's a greater chance that they will understand it enough to answer it correctly? Or is the science behind testing reading is you give them something that, like, if they're in Baltimore, you give them something about London, England, because it's not something they already can rely on their existing knowledge on. They have to be able to read it and decipher it as a person who isn't, like, in the middle of it. Which do you do for reading? Do you give? I mean, I guess maybe this is part of my blind spot of how you test for reading.
And how you build. But the issue is that if it's something that's just unfamiliar, like, one, you try to do, like, what is an average child? What would they know and understand? But again, it goes back to standards, right? Like, okay, if here are the standards, here's the eligible content from the standard, like the standard is broken down to all this eligible content. Under the standard, here are all the things that a teacher can teach, all the different ways that they can teach, right? Then you can build an assessment on there. If it is an unfamiliar content, that is fine, but it has to be able to at least have context clues. And there's so many things that it's not even if you don't have enough, like baseball, you can write a passage where there are very little context clues. Each one you think like, wait a minute, I understand this and I don't, right? If you're writing about certain things about skiing, right? Yes, a kid will be like, oh yeah, I understand skiing. But if all the terms are so weighted towards a ski culture, and that's the thing, everything is so weighted to whiteness as the default, white culture, that it advantages them when they're taking the test. and the disadvantage because it's not really seeing like, can they read well? It's how much white culture do you know?
Okay, so this
And
is
that's the
helpful in
difference.
that if you are a kid who goes to Aspen, once a year, and then you ski at other points in the year, or whatnot, and you sit down for a test, and half your classroom are people like you who go to Aspen with you to ski on a regular basis, and you got it like that in life. And the other half of your classroom are people that barely ever get outside of their neighborhood where they've been redlined. The results of both of you taking that exact same test with that exact same question would have some differences.
Yeah, it's going to be skewed a little bit.
Yeah, you're going to have some people in that classroom who are going to be like, oh, yeah, I know this is easy breezy. So like if you had a passage about Tupac, for instance, for some kids in the classroom, now you flipped it the other direction. For some kids, it's going to be like, yeah, now you're talking my language, and maybe the kid in Scarsdale doesn't do as well on this test.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and based on record sales, I don't know. White kids buy more rap albums,
but they don't know Tupac.
They
know him in the distance, like he's old to them now. So
yeah, that's true. I mean, but I think at the end of the day, what you're trying to figure out, like, how well can a kid, read and understand, and then make meaning of whatever it was that they read, right? Like that they can understand the complexities, the messages, the inferences, all of that shares like, okay, this person is reads well. They understand it. They understand the inferences. They understand the what was said and what was not said. And listen, great teachers in the classroom when they're instructing, they're building in background knowledge. They're assessing, what does my child already know, right? Like that's part of teaching. So if that's part of great teaching, assessments, and again, it still goes back to standards, and this is why we also have to weigh in on standards, right? Because if the state, it's not just about, when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about who's leading the classroom. We're also talking about who's choosing the standards for the state, right? For the children of the state. And to go back to earlier, like what you said, that biases as far as like, Southern drawl and, against a Minnesotan or Northern, dialect. It's that joke out there. Like, what do they call someone who speaks 2 languages? Bilingual, right? If you speak 3 languages, what do they call you? Trilingual, right? What do they call you if you speak 1 language?
American,
exactly. Right. So this is the only country in the world where you're talking about like what's looked at as a deficit. If you speak more than 1 language, it is looked at as a deficit across the institution of schools. Right. Because then you're like, oh, you're ELL, oh, you're this, or you're that, oh, you need to, like, it's again the mindset where there should be like, damn, you speak 2, 3 languages? That's amazing. Like, oh yeah, how do we build on what you know to further your education, as opposed to like, oh, you know what, you're so behind.
But we can't teach people who speak 1 language. Let's just be real. Like when Natalie Wexler, just in that passage that I read, said 22% Americans, she wasn't saying 22% of disadvantaged Americans. She was saying 22% of Americans are not taught well enough, to the point where you have many adults and college students who can't answer who won the Civil War.
And that's the ones who made it to post-secondary, right? So what?
Yeah. I mean, you have people who are college graduates who, if you show them a picture of the Supreme Court justices, they can't name them or don't know who they are. It's a major branch of government. They can't tell you who the Speaker of the House is. It's a major branch of government, the government that rules a good part of your life. So she's not saying, in that case, she's not indicting just a school system's ability to teach so-called marginalized people. It's to teach everybody, right? So we're giving a lot of people a free pass. Here's a problem I have with the test or racial bias thing.
I gotta admit, like I would be really challenged to name the 9 justices.
I bet you if I showed you pictures of them, I bet you would figure it out by face, right? Like if I asked people to name them without seeing them, you would probably get really low levels of full completion of all the names, people saying all the names. If I were to show you a picture, it would probably raise the scores of people to be able to identify people once I show you a picture of a person. And then, of course, there's the people who are only going to be able to name, like, well, that's Clarence Thomas. I know his ass. I know his ass.
Funny
And I
part,
know
some
he don't
people
belong
might not
there.
even be able to do that. Like, yeah, I know it's one Negro on that joint.
Yeah, right.
I don't know his
Who
name.
is that? Is that Thurgood Marshall? No, bro, that's not Thurgood Marshall. That's not.
I bet you people would say that. Yeah.
So here's my problem with the tests are racist, inherently racist, and blah blah blah. Is that it becomes too much of a crutch to dismiss the serious and valid concerns that we have about educational outcomes. So whenever I'm engaged in something with an educator that is arguing what seems to be just like a standard American educator narrative, which is just like poverty is what matters. It's variables outside of our control. Nothing that I do matters. If your kid comes out of my class and does well, it's because I'm amazing. If they come out and they didn't do well, it's because their parents are poor and they don't have college educations. And listen, I'm about racial justice. So my form of racial justice means is I'm not going to pay attention to those outcomes. I'm going to pay attention to the racism in the test and the bias in the tests and how. So I was on a panel once with AFT's number 2 person, and she's
AFT
here from
is
the American Federation of Teachers, right? So this is the highest level you get. And now she's the commissioner of education here in Minnesota. Her and I were on a panel about testing in Black communities. And she said, well, I have a friend who her daughter is Native American. And there was a test question that said, what kind of costumes do Native Americans wear? And I just think that that's wrong because, they're not costumes. These are their heritage and blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, so she had that question on a standardized test, which first of all, I think is the most ridiculous thing ever. Because if anybody right now, check me on this, go read the Minnesota sample test that we have. We have Indian poems and Israeli kind of government questions, things about all over the world, because over time they've been so beaten up that they've made them more multicultural. But I said, so in a state where 94% of our teachers are white, what do you think that the chances that arbitrarily letting 94% of our teachers write arbitrary tests that they themselves create are going to have biased questions on them versus the standardized test? Because me as a parent, I don't trust none of y'all to do better than these tests that are being created by corporations that have thousands of educators testing them, and then they trot them out into communities and test them again. It takes them 3 years to create one of these tests, and they still come out not perfect, right? Mm-hmm. But they've involved thousands of educators and then some racial panels who read them and go, yeah, you can't do this question, can't do that question. But what if we just left it in the hand of 94% of white, mostly female Minnesotan teachers in school districts that, like Minneapolis, where the majority of the kids are kids of color? What are the chances that you're going to have biased testing then?
I think 0. You just got to trust them to do what's right.
Right. See?
Like, why are you such a cynic, man? These are good, polite.
They are good, northern, and they are polite.
Minnesotans.
They're Minnesota nice. They will Minnesota nice your ass into the grave. You would come out so Minnesota nice stupid when you come out of their classrooms. My point is not to defend the standardized testing. It's to say, when I'm talking to a poorly trained white teacher who's middle class, who's mostly told to us by science that they are not seeing our kids for the way that they actually are. They're not very good judges of our kids. Mm-hmm. They're not good judges of our kids' age, their innocence, their competency for gifted education, grade level work. They're not great judges of our kids. So when one of them tells me, yeah, I don't want to use the test because I know better. Mm-hmm. I feel like I know better. I don't know what to do with that, because it's like, you don't want to be rude and be like, no, you don't. No, you really don't know better. like honestly, like, you should stop saying that, because you sound hella stupid every time you say that. Like, if you were smart, you would be like, I don't know what I don't know, and I need all the help that I can get to understand the kids that I teach better. And if a test gives me some information, I'll take it. I'm not going to take it as gospel, but I'll take that as even just yet another form of information. But for you to just be like, I know best. I know best.
I mean, the thing
Come
about
on,
it,
bro, help me out.
well, I don't know if I can, because it's like, and I get it. There is definitely, first of all, nothing's perfect. Secondly, yes, somebody mentioned like the money. Yeah, there are people who make a lot of money on all different types of assessments.
They're called teachers.
Well, so, some of our company. It's like we talked before about the textbook racket, right? Like people just writing textbooks and they're like, hey, we're going to write this for California, Texas. They're the ones that buy the most textbooks, and we don't care about content, quality, facts, any of that. We're just, just writing stuff. So, that's one aspect. But how do you sit and talk about, whether it's Kendi or anyone else, and maybe he has, but again, when you put something on Twitter with these limited characters, what happens is, what's impact? What's your intention versus impact, right? And you have people who are biased against Black children and take that and use it, right? How do you say there's racism in tests without having a joining sentence, compound sentence, say it's also in teaching and in
my God, thank you what I mean, for finally saying it. Yes,
because that doesn't make sense. Or it's just like, hey, teaching, everybody's scales of racism just falls as soon as they enter the schoolhouse door, right? It's everything on the outside. I just want to say this. Thank you for saying racism in creating assessment, and is a hell of a lot of racism in actual teaching and instruction and school systems and so forth. Like, so to put one and say that's racist, that one, oh my gosh, everything is fine and hunky dory. Like, to me, I just can't wrap my brain around those type of flat arguments that don't bring me the whole plate of food. Don't give me this little nugget and say, anti this, because the people who are not trying to train their replacements will use that, and our students will fall further behind. At the end of the day, you got to have something. Let's talk about how to improve it. Let's talk about how you need a dashboard. You shouldn't just be using standardized tests. You shouldn't use it incorrectly. And some folks don't even use it. They take the test and they're not even looking at it. Teachers should also know how to assess in the moment of how things are going. How are the kids learning? What percentage of them do? Am I still calling on the same 5 kids that'll make me feel good because I know they have the answer, and ignoring 25 to 30 others, right? There's so much science to actual teaching, and it ends up people relying on these super lazy arguments, and as a practitioner, it just pisses me off most of the time.
Well, I mean, the arguments become like a gospel at some point. So like now teachers have said it so long, tests aren't valid, tests are just inherently biased. This is my favorite one. It's the most racist thing that anybody can say to me as a intelligent Black man who is raising multiple children in a country that has a history of anti-Blackness and marginalization of non-white people. The most racist thing you can say about my kids, to me, if you are a white teacher, is I don't need those tests because all they tell me is what I already know. All the tests predict is the race and the education of the parents, and the economic status of the parents. To me, that is the same thing. Not the
skills of the teacher, right?
Not the skills of the teacher, not if the kids are being taught. So what that basically says to me, you've already decided that this entire group of people who are marked by race and income and parents' level of education, you've already diagnosed them before you've gotten a test as being incapable of learning in your classroom. So it gives you a built-in excuse ahead of time. So you're going to fail in the future because you know you can't teach. You know for a fact that this is a population you can't teach. Give me like 4 little white girls in my classroom and I'll teach the hell out of them. But everybody else, I haven't learned. My profession hasn't learned yet how to teach those other kids. So I need a built-in excuse. I need a pre-excuse so that before we have a problem called outcomes, before that happens, I could erase that outcome by saying, you're in a group of people where I don't expect you to learn. So in that group of people could be a brilliant scientist, a president of the United States, a former congressperson, a person who's going to build the next rocket ship to NASA. But because you've pre-told yourself that you are doomed basically if you are not white with 2 white college educated parents, right?
Mhm.
That's what you're telling yourself every day. That's what your tape is telling you. And I'm hearing that tape when you talk to me, an intelligent Black man who pays taxes and pays your damn salary and has multiple kids in these systems. When you say that to me, I'm saying, okay, you're Bull Connor. You need to get out the damn doorway. You shouldn't be teaching people of color because you have the wrong starting point. Your starting point should be every child that I interact with, I don't care where they come from, has a brain that is elastic, that we are told by science is capable of stretching and retaining information and being taught. That's what science teaches us. So if you want to do away with that because you are not a good teacher, right? Or because your good teaching is predicated on having the right kinds of students in your classroom. See, now we have a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest problem is you should have never said that to me. Like we could agree that that no instrument, no test is perfect. Like we agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
But what you just said earlier is the bigger point. So neither is your teaching, neither was your preparation, neither is the stuff that you're being monitored for in your district. Your principal might suck. Your district probably sucks. Your curriculum is probably, we did an audit of Minneapolis Public Schools curriculum. I will send you the report, Sharif. Mm-hmm. The audit just basically said, I don't know how any of your children learn with this curriculum that you have in the district. How is that the kids' fault? How is that the fault of the parents? So you say to me, well, scientifically speaking, the results of the test
overcame our shortcomings and tortured kids. that's what it is. We're getting paid. We don't care, but you better overcome this, or we're going to, as you say, awfulize you to death.
Awfulize us into a corner where this is my term for it: educational essentialism. Essentialism basically tells you that with certain characteristics, all things must follow after that. So if I tell you that you're poor and poor means no achievement, that basically means I'm an educational essentialist. What I have decided ahead of time is it's damn near a step away from eugenics, right? Mm-hmm. What I've told you ahead of time is just tell me what you look like and how much money you have in the bank and how far in schooling your parents went, and I'll tell you what your outcomes should be. But here's the problem with me. I want to show you something. I'm going to pull this up because this becomes a problem for the anti-testers. And it becomes, this is a situation that you will be familiar with because you probably have had to interact a little bit with this. So look at this graph here. So this is a graph of the Newark's gains in test scores during the so-called Booker era of reforms in Newark, right? Mm-hmm. So Cory Booker, Facebook, other people, it was, during the time of like a reform time within. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, so in 06 to 018, they had some pretty substantial upward ticks in their performance. My question here when I see something like this is, okay, look at these upward ticks. Now, did this happen because the kids got new parents? Did the kids suddenly of Newark become less poor? Did they become less Black and less Latino? Did they're
less traumatized, obviously.
Yeah, less traumatized, less. No, they didn't become any of those things. So you have to explain this uptick. This uptick is the thing that changed was the system. So if it's possible for systems to change in a way that creates upticks in testing outcomes, the kids' ability to demonstrate on tests what they have learned or what standards they can achieve or master, then why are we arguing about whether or not the tests themselves are flawed and not arguing about how the systems can change so that kids can demonstrate mastery on the tests?
Yeah, well, and I'm assuming DFG, those are different groupings of schools. So, the green, the blue, and the blue was all other cities. Green and orange were probably a subset of schools, and I think what did I say? DFG. But yeah, I'll definitely, share that in the chat. I'll definitely take a closer look at that. But I think, part of the argument against, testing, people will quickly say like, well, that means they didn't teach anything else. They only taught the test.
The standards.
Yeah.
They only taught the standards.
And my thing is like, wait a minute, and it goes back to just I don't know. It's deeper than hypocrisy. Like a level of psychosis. It's like almost the schizophrenia of education, right? Like you're so schizophrenic. Like in one instance, the majority of new teachers say, I was not prepared by my teacher college to teach. Right? That's in Pennsylvania. That's across the country. Most new teachers say, I'm not prepared. And then more specifically, many of them say in Pennsylvania, when they did this study across 8 teacher colleges, and they were teaching, and they said, I am unprepared to teach Black and brown kids. After 4 years of, learning in their college, teacher college, after tens of thousands of dollars, I am not prepared to teach Black children. Diverse children, whatever. They said urban children, but we know who that is. Secondly, if you say that, then you look at how many teachers say, yes, I don't learn anything in the professional development provided. Right. And so if you weren't trained in what we call pre-service in the educational thing, like before you started serving, and then in service, while you're serving, the training and the professional development, professional learning experience that you're getting. If you also say that's trash, so my pre-service was trash, my in-service was trash, where did you learn how to then assess whether my child is learning? Like, that's what I'm trying to understand. You said the other day was they learned from pictures or something, but you weren't like, while you was a very smart alecky comment, you weren't far off, because where are people learning? And I don't want to hear like, oh, I just got together and I just imagined what it could look like. And, and I'm not underplaying the power of being with master level teachers, with content experts, with groups, affinity groups who are working together to say like, hey, let's polish this lesson. Hey, let's build together the best assessment. But that's not what actually happens, because at the same time, teachers like, I have no time to collaborate with my peers. Right. And so if you have all of this stuff of what our educators are saying, and you say, but just let them create the test. I'm just trying to understand, where does the expertise come from?
Let me say well, listen, this is your biggest point that you're gonna like, because you never give me enough teacher critique for my liking, because where I go with teachers or whatnot. But when teachers are talking with such degree of certainty, like, I am the expert. Girl, I saw your results. You ain't no expert. Like, I looked at your school. I looked at your class. You need to say that you are a student of teaching, not a teacher, right? And when it comes to teaching Black and brown students in the United States, most educators, if they are honest and smart and earnest, should say, I am a student of teaching Black and brown students. And one day we will be good enough for them. We will have the schools that they deserve. And we are not there yet. That's what a humble person would say. A humble person would say that. A person who's been embalmed with all the wrong, union rights, and has been allowed to be less performing for years, and was poorly trained and doesn't know it, and didn't pass praxis 10 times before they got in, and is actually not the teacher that our kids deserve. That teacher will be one of the loudest and most wrong person on Twitter, talking about these tests don't tell us anything. These tests are just, they're just a measurement of the most ignorant thing ever. They're just a measurement of the parents' education and income, which to me tells me, okay, so we know what that means. Tell me what that means for what the high watermark is. White 2-parent families with college education suddenly become the gold standard of public education. And you literally have even ed reformers out here who's saying there's not a lot of schools can do if you have kids that are fatherless, right? They take us down some wild paths that get us away from just talking about teaching.
Yeah.
Just tell me how you teach.
Shout out to Yvonne Savior, who was Black woman, legend in Philadelphia, trained and coached countless young Black teachers and principals. I had the blessing and benefit of being able to learn at her feet, as a new teacher as well as a new principal. I wish everybody had that kind of experience as far as like the training and circumventing whatever it was, teaching us how to teach, right? And that intellectual genealogy of a teacher. Where did you learn how to teach? Who helped develop you? Who, same way that, where, we can say like, oh, these mathematicians, this is who they learned from, this is the scholarship, and this is where they trace their worldview and framework from, right? Like, we need that from, for our educators. And I think that it's always problematic when we try to look at complex issues as a singular issue. The solution is one thing. Oh, everything is fixed if you get rid of charters. Everything is fixed if you get rid of alt-cert programs. Everything is fixed if you just get rid of standardized testing. I think it's such a flat conversation. I think it's such a devoid, not even nuance, just facts, big, bold, hairy facts. It's not even about nuance, because we're talking about all the other aspects that tie into this. If we say that, the danger of, this people, and I'll put it in the chat, the sister who wrote a book, Nigerian woman, I forget her name, but she basically talks about the danger of a single story. And I think so often people try to apply a single story to our children. And if there is a single story to the children, it's about the racism that is inherently built in and played out over and over and over again on a daily basis across 180 something days a year, across 13 years. Like if there is a single story, that's what it is. And all the ways that impacts the how Black children experience school, whether it's who created the assessment, who create the lessons, right? All of that.
And I just want to say my single story is, if you're going to have a single story about our kids, it's that they are capable of way more than adults think they're capable of. That opportunities that they should have, they don't have. The single story isn't about them. It's about the environment. It's about the people in their lives and the environment. It's not about them, because God gave them to us as people with unsurpassable worth. Those kids, there's nothing wrong with them that you didn't make wrong with them, right? Like they were not born to be wrong, to be a problem, to be otherized. You have done that to them as a system and as a country, as a nation, and as a people. All right. So where's going to be your last word on standards, assessments, and accountability in public schools? Your main point, what's your headlines around the way you think we should be looking at these kind of public school essentials?
Yeah, I guess my main point would be, don't fall for used car salesman arguments. Right? If they use cardsman, if you're getting a car, and so if you're getting an education for your child, and they use cardsman says, hey, disregard the dashboard, all the red lights, don't worry about that. Matter of fact, just cover that up with butcher paper and just drive. Just trust me and what I'm selling you, and you'll be fine. I think that is a very dangerous way to drive and purchase a vehicle. It's also a dangerous way to interact with the educational system. No one I know is saying that standardized tests are, the end all. Like, there should be other ways to assess children, their learning, their growth, their development. No one is saying that it should not be, but to just ignore that, to just go ahead and say, you know what, as you said, everybody who's Black, brown, and poor, you're not going to learn anyway. Let's just forget teaching and learning centers. Let's just have talking centers. Some of my best teachers, they were always assessing nonstop. And then they wanted an independent assessment. Like, our best assessments were actually built by teachers across our network, but then also graded by folks across the network, or at least across grade levels, so that we don't fall into the trap of, yep, I taught you and I'm going to assess you and I'm going to determine how well you do. That there was some kind, even on a micro level within the school, that we wanted some type of independent, objective process, because human nature is to say, like, oh, they didn't show that they demonstrated that. They can't perform right now, but I know they can, and just that falsely attributing it. However, that's not how people interact with their own children. They want proof that, that they're being successful. So I do believe in dashboards, and standardized objective assessments are a part of that. I do believe that you cannot talk about biases in testing and not talk about biases in teaching. And I would say many of the folks who are anti-testing are sure okay with it when it comes for their kids getting in elite schools, private
Mhm.
institutions, magnet schools, and everywhere else. Like the same people who say that are often have their own children in places that required some type of assessment to get in. And I find that to be very, very curious. But I think
Mhm.
it's aligned to the mindset of, well, they're better off anyway. So of course, I don't mind them being assessed so I can see how well they're going to compete. But everybody else who's not even in an arena to compete, in my mind, why assess them anyway? Why hold me accountable to teach to a group of people that can't learn? We got to be
Yes.
wary of that.
I'll say all of that to me plus one. Um, the people that came for me yesterday is funny looking up a few of them, and they had graduated from schools that required tests to get in. And I'm thinking to myself, how are you the product of a magnet school that required test scores to get in, coming at me when I got multiple kids that I'm trying to get all the advantages in life that you had, right? Like you had these advantages, and then you want to pull the ladder up behind you and say, yeah, but those things don't matter. They're just the things that help me get scholarships and whatever, but it doesn't matter for you. Here's my bottom line on it is we have a long-standing problem in American public education with a group of kids that we have done wrong by them forever. Since the very beginning, and we have not hit a date yet where it was made right. And then from that date on, like we had new set of problems. We have a consistent problem. So if you are a person who thinks of the timeline of history as being one, and that you are observing what we have done for these kids, you should be observing the fact that we're not where we need to be. And the best that we can do if we're going to have an agreement amongst each other where we're not tearing each other apart is we're going to have some rules in place for that agreement, because it takes a lot for a Black parent to trust the American public education system, any American system, right? And the thing that you're entrusting is your child. So it takes even more for a Black parent to entrust their child to a system that has a long-term history of doing wrong by them and doing harm. So for us to have an agreement, that agreement is going to need to be based on some things that are strong and visible and agreeable to all of us. They need to be pretty transparent, right? Mm-hmm. So the very first agreement that we need to have is, if you're going to be rating my child in school for anything, I need to know what that standard is. Mm-hmm. You're going to need to articulate to me what the standards are. Tell me what a child is supposed to do in first grade and second grade and third grade. If you want to hold me accountable as a parent, you need to be clear and transparent about what the standards are, so that I know what the white kids are supposed to hit and what the brown kids are supposed to hit, the Black kids, what everybody's supposed to hit. And then I'll do my work at home to try and support them to reaching that. But you better be clear about it. They better be clear and available to us.
And something more than they'll love my class. Like, that's not good enough for you.
No,
Like,
that's not good enough for me.
They have fun.
That's not good enough for me. It's not good enough for me.
You're a tough crowd.
No, my children are historically marginalized, historically racialized, and historically harmed children within your system. You are a historically imperial mother. You were on the front lines of segregation at one point. Your ancestors did bad things to my people, and now you're almost fully in charge of teaching our kids because of this thing called Brown versus Board of Education that got rid of all of our Black educational capital. So now I'm at a particular disadvantage looking at you in the face saying that you're the expert for my kids. No, honey, that's not how this is going to work. Mm-hmm. So the standards need to be very clear, and we need to share them. And yes, you can say some of my peer parents aren't doing their job or whatnot, but you're talking to me right now. I'm going to do my job. So tell me what the standards are, and then tell me how you are going to measure whether or not my kids are getting to that standard. And I need to know it. That also needs to be clear and transparent. What is the test? Where did it come from? What is it asking my kids? How is it being judged and rated over time? How is it being improved? And give me the results in a way that I can understand them. Don't give me some NASA project dashboard on a page with all kinds of colors and fonts and whatnot. If you're an educator and you are in a system of education and you can't make those results simple, fire yourselves. Quit now. Leave. Because you're supposed to be making complex things simple for people all the time. That's what public education should be about. And the last thing is accountability. Yeah, you want to hold me accountable as a parent. You know, parents don't read to their kids. Parents don't use big words with their kids. That kids, when they come in here, they don't have no words. Like they got no words. Like everybody else got words and they didn't get some words. Like when it came to words day, they was missing. Like we had a line for words. Everybody was in line. It wasn't because what Black people are known for is not having any words. Really? How ridiculous and stupid does that sound? You sound stupid right now. Accountability needs to mean that it's two-way street. If we're in a partnership, I'm going to do my part. Don't talk to me about what other parents aren't doing. I don't want to hear it. You're talking to me right now. And when you're talking to me, the standards should be clear. The measurements and assessments should be clear. And then the accountability should be resolute, right? I pay your salary. The taxes that I pay are not insignificant. Don't treat me like I'm like some sort of meaningless client or customer or somebody that you can push aside or whatnot. It don't work like that, right? Yeah. So if you don't want this heat and you don't want this smoke, right? Let's just have a partnership that we can agree on the three pillars of that partnership: standards, assessment, and accountability. That goes two directions, and all of it should be publicly available and clear. My state, Minnesota, I think does a very good job of explaining on their website what the standards are, what the assessments do and where they came from and how they're used and why they're used, and what accountability systems are in place. We do a terrible job of teaching, but at least we do a good job of these other things, right?
Yeah, man.
No, so that's my final word. Do you have any pushback on that? Am I wrong?
Listen, I would say, no, I don't think you're wrong. I think this idea that, some people believe, back to your earlier point, that zip codes determine something. Only thing zip codes determine is, how pervasive, institutions, undermining of communities and promoting chaos and lacking of support and basically stealing money, because way back when Black people, as poor as they were, had to pitch into the white schools, but the government was not push that back into Black schools. We still see that playing out in different variations.
That's right.
Across this country. And I think the other part is tests have to be used, whatever the assessment is, whether standardized or what I'm going to end with, which is your point that you brought up many times, where unstandardized tests is, it's not, don't use it to measure how much students learn and just say, oh, they ain't learning. Oh, they don't know that. No, use it to inform your teaching. Say, oh, this assessment is an indication of how well I taught, what my skill levels are, where I need to intervene. Not just, and we're always talking about student intervention. We need educator intervention. We need school board intervention. We need policymaker intervention, right? And the biggest intervention is around their mindset and expectations, and then how well do we do it? But and the last thing I was saying, this, you've brought this up many, many times. If we're going to be this concerned, and I believe, be skeptical about everything, including standardized tests. And some states do way better. There's some, like the national one, that you can like, all right, at least I can kind of see how things are. Because some people, some states said, hey, we're going to make our assessment so easy that everybody passed, then we'll look good, right? So be skeptical about everything. It's like a graduation rate that went higher, but reading levels didn't improve. Like, hey, man, how sway, right? But at the end of the day, they bring that same healthy, determined, and dogged skepticism that you bring to standardized tests, bring that to the unstandardized tests. Like do that. The 3 point whatever million teachers in public schools, each of them providing their own unstandardized assessment, and you have no heat, fire, or tweets about that. That's where I'm like, wait a minute, like, let's at least be consistent in our skepticism. And if we're centering Black and brown children, then that's exactly what we will be.
Be intelligent people. Yeah. Be intelligent. If you got fired, what you just said, honestly, is an intelligent person's thing to say. If standardized tests that go through years of development with psychometricians who are trained in psychometrics and then vetted through thousands of educators, many of whom are people of color, on purpose to look for, to vet for racist and inherent bias in those tests. If that's still not good enough, imagine the unstandardized tests of the people who are telling you, I know what's best, who come from a demographic that is proven by science not to be the best judges of our kids. They prove to be like in every way, shape, and form. We are told that their bias and their inherent bias that they bring into classrooms. I don't care whether they read Kendi or not. I mean, I need to dislodge some of y'all. You read Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. You read some of this other stuff. I don't care. Those books aren't like Bibles. They're not like gospel. You don't read them and then all of a sudden you're transformed by like the diversity Jesus. I don't know what you think you're doing when you read them books. I don't know what you think you're doing.
You out of pocket.
Books, you know? So,
diversity Jesus.
But I just want to be real with you.
Yeah, they don't measure everything, and find out like who our children are. Know that they're brilliant, and you don't need a standardized test to know that. You know, that's a mindset. All
right, y'all. Well, listen, this has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you are still not free.
You still ain't free, yo.
Yeah, but maybe you're freer, just a little bit freer than you were when we started this. We hope to see you next Friday again. If you have show ideas or thoughts that you think of things that we should cover, shoot them to me. Like, because we are always interested in covering anything that we think people care about are talking about. So shoot them to me. My email address is citizen@hey.com, HEY.com, and we'll be glad to jump on any of those for you. You can reach Sharif El-Mekki on Twitter. His handle is at El-Mekki, SELMEKKI. You can reach me at Citizen Stewart on Twitter. Thank you for watching, giving us an hour of your time.